started, something that we never remember to tell people to do is to turn the sound off on your phone, especially since we're filming this, so if you would. Okay, so how many people want me to read this entire document? Okay, smart guys out there. All right, so if the fire alarm rings, what's the first thing we do? What? Stay put. Thank you. Okay. We all know the rest. Okay, I'm Michelle Cacavano. Al has given me charge of ArtScope after he ran it for how many years? 6?
Just about
8 years. So I take this very seriously. So I hope you like our program tonight. So this is special to me because it's photography, and you all know I love photography. So I thought we should start it off with a quote about photography. It's by Ansel Adams. I think almost everybody knows Ansel Adams' work. You don't make a photograph just with a camera. You bring to the act of photography all the pictures you have seen, the books you have read, the music you have heard, and the people you have loved. I thought that was a great quote. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about our photographer, and then I'm going to have her introduce each of the poets to you. And we've never done a show quite like this, so I hope you enjoy this. So let me tell you a little bit about Lynn based on the preface to her book, which is available in the back, and which I have purchased myself. So in the preface, a man named James Colton, who was the former director of photography of Newsweek magazine, said this: "Flames Against the Dark, Saving America's Sacred Sites, is not just a collection of photographs, but rather an extension of the soul shown through the eyes of its creator, Lynn Butler. I've had the honor of knowing Lynn for more years than I wish to reveal, but suffice to say, her commitment to this project was equally as long, if not longer. When I first saw Lynn's work, I was immediately drawn to it because of its ethereal nature. Lynn uses a long exposure method in her photographs, which results in a painterly effect that gives them their intrinsic beauty. Many of her images include horses, which I have always believed to be spirit animals. For many people, horses represent strength and freedom, two qualities which are evident in many of Lynn's images." Okay, so now I'm going to introduce Lynn. Lynn?
Here with my friends, and many are poets here that
Like us.
are poets, and they also have poetry about the environment, saving the environment, which always has been a concern of mine, and as well as the philosophy and the beliefs of the Native Americans, who only take from the environment what they really need, and because they believe that Mother Earth is alive, and what we take from the earth should be what we need. But if we need to return something or not take other things that we don't need out of greed, that we shouldn't. And from the very beginning, some of the cave paintings that I've photographed with quite a few of the tribes in my book have shown stories about the Native Americans hunting with the buffalo, and then if they catch 2 buffalo, they return 1. They don't eat 2 if they don't meet them. That's their philosophy always. And I guess I'll just start very quickly with I really love horses and have raised them and have them And I met Margot Stever, one of the poets who started the Hudson Valley Writers Center in Sleepy Hollow, and brought a train station that became the Writers Center that they purchased, and have great writers, and they teach writing. And so I met Margot. The two of us had horses, and I lived in the area where Margot was at Sleepy Hollow, and we collaborated on a book with poetry and horse poetry, with some of the photography that I did in the area that, well, different parts of the world, but it started in Sleepy Hollow where I lived. And I started to notice that the land was going to be developed, and the drainage wasn't proper, and it didn't look like it was going to be regulated, and I was worried that the beautiful trails that we rode in were not going to last if they developed them. So I started to photograph, and because it was the place where Washington Irving was born, and my shadow reminded me of the Headless Horseman as I galloped through the woods. And so I took a camera in high film speed and photographed the different areas where I couldn't reach on foot to take cameras. And one day, just by accident, I didn't have a fast enough film, and the landscape was dark, and I got movement with the movement of the horse. I was using black and white film, and a copy of the book is back there. And so that was my experimentation, realizing that with slow shutter speeds and the different movements of the horse could produce beautiful brushstroke type of exposures. And there always was a little bit of a surprise, because I eventually learned what speed my horse would go and what shutter speed to put the camera in, but there were always light and sunlight that you didn't expect to have in the picture, so it's almost like a miracle when you would see something. And this was pre-Photoshop. This book that I started 40 years ago, which is, and I found that, and I met through Margot and through us working at Sleepy Hollow, the Rockefellers, who had the trails, and then through Diana Rockefeller, who's David Rockefeller's wife, the younger one. David Rockefeller Sr. was alive at that time, and they lent me their carriage horse to take photos in the trails, and I found out they were trying to raise money at one of the parks in Maine, where they did the carriage trails as well, and so they lent me a horse, and I ended up to go up, but to photograph in that area. And the interesting thing is everything seems to be connected. And through the Rockefellers, they introduced me to a woman called Margaret Owens in California. They told me about her. She saved the sea otters and helped preserve the coast of Big Sur. So I went out, and her friend was the chief of the Esselen Indians, who is a tribe that is very little known. The Esselen Institute is a teaching institute in California, but the Esselen people didn't realize that they were a tribe, and they were one of the first tribes that were almost wiped out totally by the Spanish, and when they came. And they believe that they are the guarders of the window of the West, and that is where the soul passes. There's a mountain range before it leaves the earth. And there's the windows of the East, which are the Iroquois Indians, and other different directions have different Native American tribes that claim that they're the guarders of the different windows, and they protect the land around that area. And so I went out and met Little Bear, who took people into the wilderness for a living. They had a small ranch of 40 acres. They used to own thousands of acres all the way to Big Sur, and it was all taken from them. And at that time, when I met him, they had a 40-acre ranch in the Ventana, outside the Ventana Wilderness, and they had sacred areas of birthing rock, which in the book are pictures of some of the sacred areas, but that was going to be destroyed because I hate to call him the bad guy because he's one of my favorite directors, but at the time he was, this is Clint Eastwood, was mayor of Carmel, and he wanted to develop some of his very fancy ranches and golf courses, and he needed water, which is a big issue in California. So they were draining some of the rivers to do the watering of the golf courses, and they actually interrupted the salmon, the steelhead, returning to the ocean because the rivers dried up. So my first working with Little Bear, who is 40 years ago, was a protest ride on horseback over in the Carmel River, which this is his son, who's now married with a child, who was about 11 at the time, and that he went on the ride with me. And so we protest because there was water in certain areas where the golf courses and the development wasn't going. And it actually, a couple of years ago, like 3 years ago, I'll just fast forward, Little Bear called me up. The book had fallen through on 2 major publishers for different financial reasons. And he called me up and he said, we just got our land back of 2,000 acres from a land grant that was passed in California, and they were able to get the money to buy the land. So he said, come back out here and photograph our land, the rest of the land, which I'd never had a chance to be at, and then we'll get the book out. So I'll just, this is the Carmel River, that at the time, there was only one area with water. And as I got to know Little Bear and actually be part of their family little by little and spend time with them, this is a healing ceremony in the kiva that they built, which is where they go into the earth and the soul comes out of the fire through the chimney, through the water. It's a hole in the kiva, and they believe that that's how they release the bad parts of the soul and become one with the earth. So that is something that usually you don't photograph at all. And this picture next to it is one of Little Bear's friends next to the trees that would have been destroyed had the dam passed in California. They were going to wipe out the entire wilderness, all of the burial sites, which turn out to be, and the cave paintings, which turn out to be between 6 and 10,000 years old, 10,000 BC, which is some of our oldest caves. And had they been able to destroy animals and land and everything else there. And with the fight going on, the fight lasted till, actually when I went back to California, my niece has become the editor of the paper in Monterey, wrote an article that finally the water companies were not allowed to drain after the 10th time that they weren't supposed to do it, but this was the ultimatum. And the water finally has gone back for the salmon to return to the ocean. And the picture across there is the mother and child on the beach, and that's the area where the salmon swim to go to the ocean. The prayer ceremony is in Point Lobos, where the Catholic Church and the Spanish knew that they believed in the windows as the soul passes. That's why they have missions set up at different points on the window, the Coronel Mission, and and the others that were built there. And so that was a prayer ceremony 40 years ago at the beach, and the rider on Big Sur Beach, that is now back to their land, but because they used to own the land from the sea all the way back into the Ventana Wilderness. So that this is a chief 40 years ago, who's also a chief of the Rumsen tribe, which is in that same area. there are about 127 tribes in California of languages that have been lost. People don't realize there were that many different Native American tribes. And his name is Chief Patrick Yanahay, and he preserved and some grounds that they found that his ancestors were buried on, and they were given the land back. And now he's 84, and I went back out there and I asked would he mind if, you know, we went back out to Point Lobos to take the picture. I wasn't sure that he could get out there, but he got out there much faster than I did. He was in great shape. So this is a shaman through a ceremony with Little Bear, and the entrance to the cave, the painted caves, and the pictures of some of the painted caves and the petroglyphs are in the book, but the very end photo is the entrance. And then there, while I ended up to show my work at the Portland Museum in Maine, a doctor asked the curator if they could buy something, and he bought some work, and later I sent him a card, since he was on my mailing list, of the Native Americans, and he called me up and he said, "This is my passion. I built a hospital for the Navajos in Chinle in Four Corners in Arizona." And he's from Denver, and he flew out in his own plane and to operate on the Navajos who need their hands, and he does tendon transplants. And once a month, and got other doctors from Denver to fly out there. So Dr. Hamlin called me and he said I could come out. I went to Denver. He happened to be on the board of the Denver Art Museum, which was great. So I was able to see one of the curators out there. And then we flew to Chinle for him to show me the hospital. And I met some of the Navajos and rode on horseback into Canyon de Chelly and Canyon del Muerto, which is where many Indians, 130 or 40 Indians, were driven at one point in the 1800s and then killed. And the horse in the Starlight picture is one from Canyon de Chelly. And this stallion, this black stallion, at the time I was with another Navajo, and we were both on horseback. And it was a little bit of a funny story. I came and he saw the New Yorker with 10 cameras strapped all over, and he rolled his eyes. He thought, here's this idiot going to get up on a horse with all that camera equipment and, you know, is going to get dumped off, and that's the end. And by the time that we finished the ride, he was carrying the cameras. He was my good friend. But we met this stallion. The black stallion is the leader of the wild horses in Canyon de Chelly, and nobody ever sees him. And he came out, and there were 2 mares that came out behind him, and I thought he's gonna have to pass us. We're right here, it's not that wide. And he looked at me, and then he literally climbed up the rocks. I had no idea that a horse could climb rocks the way how athletic our horses that we have. We worry if they step on a rock. These horses are quite incredible. And so, you know, that was taken in Canyon de Chelly, and then let's see. So basically, they were from the Navajo tribe, and at the very end, just before the book came out, a friend of ours is the CEO of a medical company that takes care of the Shinnecock Indians in Long Island. They own 1,000 acres in Southampton, and it's been a big struggle between them and possibly having a gambling casino so that they could have some money, and people trying to, you know, object. And so I got to know some of the Native Americans and did a little chapter on their book, because she was interested in having their story told. And so just one other part, that I guess it was in the early 90s, I went with the chief of the Iroquois Indians, who was Chief Shenandoah, of the 5 tribes. and he is the chief that brought the buffalo back to New York State. And he, an ancestor of his who was a shaman, had a prophecy that it was important to, bring the buffalo back, and he did. And I went to Washington, D.C. with him and a lot of other leaders of different tribes who I had met, and they opened the Senate with a peace pipe, and Al Gore was vice president at the time, so that'll give you an idea of what time period that was. And we went into the Indian Treaty Room, which none of the Native Americans had been in, and before until that moment, and they believed that once the birth of the white buffalo calf, which happened a few weeks before Washington was born in Wisconsin, that this was the time that the Native Americans had to step up in a leadership role to talk about the environment and what was happening, and the greed and the rampant development, and to save these spiritual sacred sites. So it's not only that there are sacred sites on the Native American land, but we have it through our country, that it's a site where we're connected through our soul. And I'm sure many people have been to places like that where, if we destroy them, it's a very special connection to the earth, and they need to be preserved. So after the birth of the white buffalo calf, and the person who showed me the caves, they're the oldest petroglyphs, was Red Cloud, who is the grandson of the Red Cloud in the Buffalo Bill show of generations ago. And he was the guarder of that petroglyph. He was the only one who knew the story. And that's where the buffalo were caught and they let one go. That was part of one of the stories that he had mentioned to me, how they didn't take with greed. And one other thing too, that we got our Constitution from Jefferson, from the Native American, the Iroquois Constitution. It was their laws that we formed our Constitution for. So the Native Americans have been persecuted, and we have a poem that was written by another scientist who works with different inventions that go up on space travel, who wrote something for the book that Margot is going to read. But in 1978, finally, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed, where the Native Americans can actually practice their ceremonies in their own language. So they were not even allowed until 1978 to be able to practice and do their ceremonies and with their own language. I don't want to take up too much more time. I'll read about the poets, but because of Margot, we've done several books. We did a book with some great poets that she either found through people got permission to use, or the poets gave us the poetry, and that's called Imperiled Landscapes, Endangered Legends, which is on the back, and it's all photographs taken from horseback in different parts of the country, because there's environmental disaster going on everywhere. I pursued horses because it's my love in the beginning, and I ended up to go to the Camargue in France, where an area was going to be destroyed so that tourists could get to Provence faster, and it was a migratory place for birds, and so those horses became part of the work. And I've just had a love and interest in horses always, and I've done a couple of horse pictures because Margot has that love of horses and has written books with poems about horses. And her book that just came out, called The End of Horses, she used the picture of, these are, one other quick thing, these are the Mustangs that one of the Navajo, he was a veterinarian and he lived in Four Corners. And I found out that he was going to Wyoming, that he lived in Wyoming, Cheyenne, near Cheyenne. and I was asked to judge. I'm an AKC judge also, so I was judging the Kali Club of America, and I thought, great, I'll go out there, and I called him, and he has a sanctuary called Wind River Horse Sanctuary, where he saved 250 Mustangs, and they have them on land in Wyoming, and Margot used on her book the cover. And so I've done a few covers for the different books, but I'll just read a little bit about each poet, and Margot will start. Margot Stever, the focus of Margot's books, End of Horses, is on the sixth extinction, one of the ongoing greatest mass extinctions in the history of the earth, and only one precipitated by humans. And the photographs that I have in my books depict different efforts to protect the Native American heritage from distinction. About the End of Horses, author Jeffrey Harrison has said, Stever's phrasing and indecisive imagery are always invigorating, even or perhaps especially when her lyricism becomes tinged with a sense of unease. The urgency becomes particularly acute in the poems about animals and their plight in the hands of humans, as she both records and honors the almost gone, the forgotten. So that's Margot's work. Sally Blumestone also is, and Margot edited my book along with Susanna Case, the last poet, and were two of the editors on the book. And as a series, the poems in Sally's echolocation swing back and forth from the natural world keenly observed, rain, birds, sunflowers, even a clam, to the contortions of the human heart, mostly caused by hurt and loss. This is written by Billy Collins, who was the poet laureate a few years ago. Just as the poems in echolocation revere our natural world as sacred, this is from her personal point of view. And then Susanna H. Case, Susanna's book, The Damage Done, is a series of poems set in the late 60s and early 70s during the US government's COINTELPRO period, the program of harassment targeting various progressive groups and their supporters, including Native American rights activists in the American Indian movement and their supporters. So Susanna has a keen interest in these rights, and her book that she'll read will have that you'll hear. They all are about rights, human dignity, and saving of our planet. And they're different books from Margot's, the Writer Center of poets that have won awards and been published by Slapping Hole Press, which is the publisher at the Writer Center. And that's the organization where I've done some covers of work in the past, including with a Holocaust. I did a book with a Holocaust survivor, and one of her people that got the award, her grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, so we used some photos that I had permission to use from different Nazi hunters who had done books on photography in France and Europe, and I was able to use that among the place in color where the photo was, where the children were exterminated. So that's a cover of another book. So here's Margot Stever with her poetry.
Which is an anthology of poems about family called What's Eaton poems of family at Century's End. And then the one about the Holocaust that she mentioned is this chapbook, which is a beautiful and harrowing collection.
What's the title?
It's They Become Stars. And then this one is Every Present Thing a Ghost, which you can see it's a photograph from this exhibition and from Lynn's book as well. I don't know how to make this thing stay up, but
And this is Margot's book, The End of Horses, which is,
Oh, that's great.
the photograph is
Thank
over
you.
there and it's back on the table. That I think she's gonna read some.
yes. I wanted to thank Michelle Capabano and Barbara Hyman and Lynn for organizing this reading and this beautiful art exhibit. It's so exciting to see these photographs in a much larger form than the book, and it's even more graphic and the book is just absolutely spectacular. I hope everyone gets a chance to take a look at it. And I'm pleased to be reading with my good friends and colleagues Susanna H. Case and Sally Bloom-Dunn, both who are working on Slappering Hall Press, the press that we were just talking about that has used so many of Lynn's photographs. It's wonderful to have a chance to also see Lynn's book, as I mentioned, and I wanted to thank everyone for being here. Many of my poems, as Lynn mentioned, relate to nature and the sixth extinction. That was a term first used by Barbara Colbert in her book, The Sixth Extinction, which won the Pulitzer Prize, I think it was around 2014. Definitely a book worth reading. I wanted to start with some poems from my first collection, which actually, guess what, has Lynn Butler's photograph on the cover. And these are wild horses on the Camargue. And I wanted to read from this book the poem Ascension, which begins with an epigraph by a naturalist, the late Faith McNulty. Ascension. It takes 7 strong men to drag the 6-foot heart of a blue whale across the deck of a whaling ship. Beads of sweat well up on the sea-stained faces of the 7 men who bear the still warm heart of the blue whale to the boiling vats. The men are deliverers. They tug, rip, tear the heart across the deck to the seething pots. But their hands stick to surfaces like fly paper and recoil, the red matter teething into fingers as if leaching out the blood. Ventricles, gaping mouths stand ajar. Red smoke rises in the darkening mist. Harsh wind raps against crevices, something trying to get back in, tapping out an aberrant beat, an unknown code, and something whines long and low, a sea moan. Only a crane can lift a 6-foot heart. And as the last inch of the raised organ recedes into the stewing vats, dismembered parts of the heart ascend and billow over the deck. 7 men inhale the vision, their hearts slackening with each breath. When I wrote the next poem, I was thinking about the great Chilean folk singer Victor Jara, who was murdered by Pinochet's ultra-right-wing forces in the stadium where people were imprisoned. Jara was singing the imprisoned people a song, and Pinochet's goons destroyed his hands before murdering him. And this poem begins with an epigraph by Bertolt Brecht. It was written quite a number of years ago, in the 80s. Conversation with Bertolt Brecht. Solely because of the increasing disorder in our cities of class struggle, some of us have now decided to speak no more of cities by the sea, snow on roofs, women. Brecht. As if the Chilean songs of revolution would bring back the gray fishing boats, sailing through frail, deepening waters at dawn, and the seagulls making earthly sounds. as if these songs could restore the balance, the driven leaf, nailed, old, and rusted, shoved through the bent bough. Each step through mirrors brings us back to the pitch of sleeplessness, the unstrung dream, an oil slick on an ocean still and black. As if all the songs of revolution could bring the murmuring tree back, could restore wind to the rigging, the full sail to the morning light. How many years, messages, wars, strange incidences, ironies, the wary eye of the mother wanted to protect her child, promised more, cities near the sea, clear waters, full sail, the morning light. And I wanted to read one poem from my collection, which was published in 2019 by Cap and Carey Press. This is one of my books. It does not have Lynn's photograph on the cover. And the poem is titled, My Mother is Dying. In the place where she belongs, suffering erases itself. Doves bring her seeds. Horses sleep next to her in the straw. Where she belongs, a welcoming place holds her, keeps her from running away. The greenness of the hay turning to gold. Already the rain's restless trajectory. My mother is busy dying. She no longer knows my name. This is the wind of Eden, the wand of change, the last slave of silence, the knave of rain. So quiet the roving of each vacant quest. Let her be buried in the sea by the seaberry, the briar rock, the fossil chamber. Alone, blown, roadside stray, the flown, restless, wayward ringing, bells clang, ocean down past rolls. Wandering once again, now I return to the center, searching the level earth, calling her name, remembering that I am lost. The path unfurls before my dog and me, walking to the rocks, the ocean on one side, the bay on the other, eiders blessing the waves. The seagull's spontaneous burst, how it hurts with the radio blaring. My mother is dying, gone from a body that has abandoned her. Cry because everything goes haywire, because this is Apollo's siren lyre, the field-worn answer, the childless response, children waiting for some God to bring them home. And then I want to read some poems from my latest collection, which has this poem that Lynn mentioned on the cover. And many of these poems are also about the sixth extinction. I wanted to read one in honor of the 1,100 mutilated dolphins that washed up on the shore of France a couple of years ago. And the same unspeakable scene has occurred too many times before that and since then. The dolphins had tried to get to the surface to breathe, that's why they were mutilated. Trawlers now work in pairs and drag a net between them, and as a result, the European dolphin is on its way to extinction. Ballad of the Dolphin. Ancient Greeks said they should be treated as humans. Their sailors would not kill dolphins. How I have thought of you caught in the fishermen's nets. They would set them to trap you to catch the tuna that swam under your schools. How the fishermen hung you still alive, upside down. Your prize brought others. Fishermen grabbed you by your tail, strung you, and turned you head down in water, tied you to lifting hooks, and dragged you to the docks. If any of you were still alive when they slung you on cement, they stabbed you. How last survivors churned the water red, leaping in panic, waiting to die. In a good catch, it took them 3 days to kill all of you. How mothers whose calves were entangled could not lift them to the surface. They listened to their helpless underwater clicks and sighs. How often I remember the whale skippers who would radio the location of hundreds of you, allowing tuna fishermen to track down your entire pod. bayonets deep, foaming, wide, so that hundreds could fit inside. How they used underwater sound to confuse and drive you down. How many of you drowned. Fishermen did not want to compete with you, but killing you was not enough. How they used the screams of several to slaughter more. How one of you hangs from the crowd, still alive, calling, calling. I actually took notes about that, and I couldn't look at them for about 10 years. And then I did when I realized it was still happening. I was so horrified. And then I just wanted to read a poem that's not quite so difficult to listen to. Galloping double bareback. Down sandy edges of paved country roads without helmets, bareback, the sisters clung.
Sorry, Margot.
That's okay. The sisters clung to each other, to the horse, to tree-lined ways that snaked around and through, as if going somewhere were not the goal. Their bodies twinned, hair wind-whipped, the triple rocking of legs pounding, the leaping beat of hooves. The girls struggled to stay the horse rippling through them like storm. Wind-battered trees that framed the hush of birds silenced by their galloping. The muddy paths, the mourning dove, soft-eyed windows of distant houses. Head down, the quieted horse plowed through grasses, his massive form sleek, willowy. So much did they long for the beast's velvet nose to be buried in their arms. Susanna Case is going to read very shortly, and we're excited to edit an anthology titled I Want to Be Loved by You, Poems on Marilyn Monroe, and it actually won a number of awards, and we did so many readings from the anthology. It was really an exciting experience to learn about Marilyn Monroe, who I really knew almost nothing about. Didn't realize how amazingly intelligent she was, and what an incredibly interesting life she actually had. And I wanted to read my poem that's in the anthology, Beauty Parlor. A pedicurist clips a hangnail from a client's big toe, while Monsieur Mark, cultivated Belgian, whittles away at her hair. He praises her Botox, only 5 injections, her face now full and taut. In 1905, blondined hair was scandalous. Over a century later, I'm trying to make mine as platinum as possible, bleach out, then blend with the gray growing in, cut down on visits and cost. While I stamp out signs of age, my stylist, a striking woman who was recently a man, talks about her boyfriend in a soft, masculine voice. On the corner below at Lex and 28th, we observe a woman, blonde hair straggling, like Marilyn's on her way down. But this woman's roots have grown in 3 inches of black. What a shame, exclaims Monsieur Mark. The woman stumbles, gropes the trash can, body bent over, off balance, oddly leaning, she careens, wobbles into the streets. Bus brakes screech, she hawks green phlegm. Must be on crack, says one client. Mr. Mark wonders, why doesn't she do something with her hair? And I just wanted to read 2 more short poems. And I wanted to read the title poem, which is End of Horses. I write to you from the end of the time zone. You must realize that nothing survived after the horses were slaughtered. We sleep below the hollow, burned out stars. We look into dust bowls searching for horses. When you walk in the country, you will be shocked to meet substantial masses on the road. We do not know whom to blame or where the horses were driven, who slaughtered them, or for what purpose. Had the horses slept under the linden trees, the generals and engineers pucker and snore on the veranda. My last poem's titled Ocean Birds. Jealous is the night, the feckless night, coming over us as water into sea, the forceful day's geography turned black. Your body is the sea I float upon, your skin becomes the waves. Nothing will ever bring you here to me, nothing will ever call you back. Thank you. And then wanted me to read a poem by another poet who we know, who's also a scientist, a very brilliant man. And so this is a poem in her beautiful book. Our dead are different from yours. 30 years ago, construction halted on I-279. Down from Penn Brewery and North Catholic, bones were found where a Boat Lake church had stood. 727 dead were sifted from the earth and cataloged, while backhoes, pavers, and politicians and lawyers stood by. The Votley remains were separated for burial and laid with a single marker. Present were scientists, reporters, and Dorothy Davies, baptized at Votley Church 80 years before. No living relative ever found, but the Votley dead were on protected ground and respected. Last fall, the Standing Rock Sioux found sacred ground on the Dakota Access Pipeline path. Now their dead lie pulverized beneath an easement and 30-inch pipe cradled in cement. That's by Don Krieger. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sally Loomis-Dunn, and I wanted to thank Lynn for organizing this. I feel like it's such an honor to be surrounded by Lynn's photos. I first encountered them maybe 20 years ago, and her reverence for the natural world and the journey she's gone on to create these photos, I just have a lot of respect for it and regard. My poems are not directly environmental, except the first title poem from my book, Echolocation, that I'll read to you. But I was raised with a real reverence and love of nature, largely by my mom. It kind of took the place of religion in our house in some way. So I'm going to read the dedication to the book, and it goes like this. It's a quote from a Ted Kooser poem. For my mother, were it not for the way you taught me to look at the world, to see the life at play in everything, I would have to be lonely forever. So here's the title poem. It's called Echolocation. The whales can't hear each other calling in the noise-cluttered sea. They beach themselves. I saw one once heaved onto the sand with kelp stuck to its blue-gray skin. Heavy and immobile, it lay like a great sadness, and it was hard to breathe with all the stink. Its elliptical black eyes had stilled, were mostly dry, and barnacles clustered on its back like tiny brown volcanoes. Imagining the other whales, their roving weight, their blue-black webbing of the deep, I stopped knowing how to measure my own grief. And this one, large and dead on the sand, with its unimaginable 500-pound heart. The next one I'm going to read is called Kiev Zoo, and I don't know how many people know this, but when Kiev was first bombed, there were zookeepers who decided to stay with the animals who were in the zoo to keep them comfortable, to protect them, to make them, to make life bearable during this time. They risked their lives. This is Kiev Zoo. It's about an elephant. When the elephant wakes, panting and shrieking, the keeper who sleeps in the same enclosure palms apple after apple onto the creature's tongue. Nearby, bombs explode. He offers fruit as a prayer through a long stretch of silence that feels both interminable and fragile as human skin. Sometimes he sings to the elephant while he strokes her trunk. In the photograph that shows the two, the elephant's tongue extends long as a human arm, and the tip of the tongue and the keeper's hand are holding the apple together, as in an old Dutch painting I once saw. Two young girls in an amber field, a peach between their palms, sharing the heft of the fruit, their fingers entwined. The zookeeper's uniform is cremaced with shadows, gray as the elephant's skin. This one's called Northern Flicker. Have you ever seen one? They're beautiful, beautiful birds. This was at the beginning of the pandemic, and it felt like a sort of visitation because I'd only seen one once, I've never seen one again. Northern Flicker. I wish I could trade places with that bird. I'd slip into its elegant pattern of polka dots, some of them fading as into the folds of a fine silk blouse. On top of the flicker's fine-boned head, a flare of blue, like a tea hat my mother wore on Easter Sundays. I'd gladly place it on my head and trill her hallelujahs if I could trust once more what she used to tell me, that if we could all just be good, we would suffer less. In these bright-lit times, I am drawn to the flicker's name. The momentary dimming that it brings to mind is when a hand passes close to a dinner candle. This next one, it's also a pandemic poem. I think a lot of us spent time in nature, and the relationship became more intense with the natural world, I think, for a lot of us. So this is called Birches. Birches. I walk the rough stone driveway, and from their long white trunks, brighter than winter air, I sense their dark eyes watching, motionless, without judgment, as when taking something fully in. I know these eyes are wounds healed over or scars from branches fallen, and I know the language between us is untranslatable. But for the entire 3-mile hike, I sense their eyes behind me, holding me, as I might hold an overfull glass of water, meniscus trembling in the white winter sky. As they look with great precision, measure me as I grow smaller by the mailbox, letter in my hand. And though at a great distance, I can feel them taking in, the loops and dips in the black script of the address and its return, as I might observe without distinction the wreaths of moss around their trunks if I were focusing on something else or everything at once. This next one is kind of an elegy for my mom. She died in 2018. The only thing you need to know is that the periwinkles mentioned in the poem are the shells and not the flowers of the little dark snails. Honey, it's called. The mud flats are knotted with black snails this morning, periwinkles, you would have chimed. I rose with you most days back then, hours before the family woke, you with yellow pail in hand, swinging like a metronome. Sad is how I feel this summer, you 4 months gone. And the sadness keeps changing. Like the honeyed water passed from bee to bee, honey sac to honey sac, less water each time, until the honey, pure, sits in the combs of the hive. The next couple of poems, I recently became a grandmother. My grandson's 2 years old almost. So this is about my daughter when she first became pregnant, after winter solstice. Because you are pregnant, the days grow rounder with light. The long oaks bend towards each other as through a glass orb. Loose blouses like snowdrifts. I wish I had sung to you more when you were inside me and carried you less like the marriage I knew was failing. I wish I could have kept my mind in the same place as my body. This year, the winter will not drag on. I will measure the slowly accruing light in your changing form. Who knows what settles as I watch you slice the peaches? Maybe a future entomologist's fingers are finding their first meticulous rhythm. Maybe the delicate register of your child's voice is gathering its notes. Let's see. I don't know how most of you felt when you received the vaccine the first time. For me, I got very teary. It just felt like a very big moment. So there's this really cool poet, I don't know if you know her, Naomi Shihab Nye, and she created an anthology. I see some nods. She created an anthology for people to address the vaccine, people from age 6 to 100, poets, non-poets. It's a really beautiful thing, and so this was my contribution to that. Dear Vaccine. Dear Vaccine, I am watching the nurse lift the small vial of you, clear as any cloudless sky. Because we have the cow to thank for your name, dear Vaccine, I am picturing 4 or 5 red Angus in a long grassed field, unfettered as the few good decisions I have made. The nurse lifts the syringe, then dabs my arm, and there's one cow in particular, standing by the weather-worn post and rail fence, the kind that lined the fields of my childhood. And this bovine's eyes shine like the pond where we dunk ourselves to ease the sweltering days, lying afterwards side by side on the warm granite slab. Dear Vaccine, I'm remembering one afternoon when Lila nearly drowned, and Father dove in, dove down, and pulled her up, blued but coughing. And we all cried with the kind of relief we had never felt before. I watched the nurse and thanked her, and thanked her, and thanked her once more. This poem is called Gray Whale. Gray Whale. When they read the metal tag on her pectoral fin, a surprise of dark Cyrillic letters on this gray whale, who had swum some 14,000 miles interbreeding continent with continent, self with self. Strange that I think of you now, Father, though you too had lived, mostly below a surface, the breadth of which we could not know. Until they read her tag, the cetologists had thought the gray whales off the coast of Baja were of a different species from the ones in Minsk. When I found your lacquer boxes, so small they fit into my hand, with their depictions of our home, the pots above the stove, their odd discolorations, the cheerful curtained windows that looked out at the pines, I felt sad I had not known your heart would swim such distance for us. You had never shown us one. And how small you had to make yourself to see each scene and paint it, like an ant stepping carefully along one of those dark passages in its hill of dirt that nobody sees inside. I'll read 4 more poems. This one's called Work. work. One day my husband and I were kayaking and we saw these two people and I was just kind of imagining their lives work. I could tell they were father and son. The air between them slack, as though they hardly noticed one another. The father sanded the gunnels, the boy coiled the lines, and I admired them there, each to his task in the quiet of the long familiar. The sawdust coated the father's arms like dusk coats grass in a field. The boy worked next on the oarlocks, polishing the brass until it gleamed as though he could harness the sun. Who cares what they were thinking? Lucky in their lives that the spin of the genetic wheel slowed twice to a stop and landed each of them here. My husband and I were really lucky. We got to go to the Galapagos. And so we had seen some knots, and we saw these frigate birds, right, with their big, yeah. So this is called startled. Startled. Massive and black, the frigate birds on brambles in the distance. Their bright red duller sacks, full as spinnaker sails, billow from their feathers like giant hearts of skin and air. They remind us of our own hearts, oversized and awkward, quivering in lightest wind. And this is another, I have just two more poems, short ones. This is another Galapagos poem. And the blue-footed boobies, yeah? Blue-footed boobies. The doofy guy at the bar, trouser cuffs inched up, bright turquoise socks. He waddles over to the pretty woman at one of the side tables and begins his rhythmic soft stepping dance in place, slower and calmer than all that is around her. And she looks down at her own blue feet that have started to sway a little. One over, she thinks, why not? And begins. And the last poem, any readers of the Farmer's Almanac? Has a lot of fun little sayings in it. So this was one, it said, watch for the shoulders of the beets to protrude above the soil. Okay, beets. Thanks so much for listening, and then you're in for a treat with Susanna reading next. Beets. Yes to the shoulders of the beets, an upward tug on red-veined leaves, as if might follow miniature torsos, legs, and feet. Today I rescue them as men I have loved, because for a moment, in this guise, they can all be good. Thanks so much.
I'm sorry I didn't make enough copies of this, but just So I want to thank Lynn Butler for inviting me to read along with Sally Beavis-Dunn and Margaret Teff-Stieper, two poets whose work I respect a lot. And in particular, I am grateful she invited me because I am not per se a nature poet, but I am going to start with a poem about a buffalo. And this is a poem that was inspired by a photograph that someone showed me, and I have some copies of the photograph which are seeing as they get passed around. I was in Vietnam in February, and I really didn't think I was going to come back alive because the traffic is so chaotic that every time I crossed the street, I was certain that I was going to get squashed by about 100 motorcycles, which would be coming at me. And I had a conversation with a man named Hung Do who said the trick is you have to cross very slowly. Because if you cross slowly, even though every pore of your body is screaming at you to run, if you cross very slowly, what happens is they can see you and they have enough time to go around you, and otherwise they're going to smash right into you. And one of the things we started to talk about was just how much stuff was on these motorcycles. I mean, they were piled high with things. And so he showed me a photograph, the one that I'm passing around, and that photograph inspired this poem. So it's titled, After a Photograph by Hung Do of a Street Scene in Hanoi. You don't need to have seen the photograph to, I hope, to appreciate that poem, but the photograph is there for you anyway. Which is better, we debate, car or scooter? It's a poor country. A man wants a car, but buys a scooter. More versatile, he explains, can transport couch, door, even water buffalo. Here is the photo he shows me on his phone. Brown buffalo draped over the back of a scooter behind the couple in front. Only the man sits fully on the seat, the animal's legs bound together with heavy brown rope. Brown cloth wraps the animal's head so it cannot see, though surely it hears the noise of the road. It's upside down, looks dead. Alive, Hung Do says, they like to kick. How else but a scooter to get one to the home that makes a man. Now an apartment, houses so expensive. Used to be a man needed 3 things in this order: water buffalo, wife, house. Now a job has replaced the water buffalo, and the wife goes to work. Her wages will transport them like a second water buffalo, more slowly than a car or scooter, that will carry heavy loads as a scooter does. They will eat it, meat and butter fat, deep-grained hide for shoes, the second animal sign in the Vietnamese zodiac after the mouse. So, one of the things I'm interested in is power and how it's misused, and how, as Lynn mentioned in my most recent book, how it's was misused by the government in the late 60s, early 70s, and really from the 50s, because the COINTEL program was started by J. Edgar Hoover to harass various groups of people. And also interested in power, how it's misused in the context of gender, and how it impacts on the views that and experiences of young girls as they're growing up and as they start to learn about love and what love means. So I'm going to read a few poems about that, and then I'll read a few poems about COINTELPRO. This is called Love Stories for Girls. Every distortion I learned about love came from romance comics and later telenovelas. I blame the words love at first sight, walking in the rain, walking on beaches, dancing on beaches, red convertibles. I blame messages about the unimportance of a career, unrealistically perfect bodies and men with full heads of hair. I blame super long eyelashes and the negative portrayal of eyeglasses, the idea of nice girls. I blame kissing, really, as if kissing fries the brain, and afterward everyone ends up in love with an inappropriate person and they're never the same again. I blame makeup that tears never smear. I blame tears. This is a history of commitment, by which I mean unpredictable. I was squirrely in my 20s, wore peacock feather earrings, Mother Earth skirts, tried to save money for harder times, though usually I was broke. People around me snorted coke. Love veered off before impact, a twitch away from being a traffic accident. What happened in my 30s, I hammered together lopsided bookshelves, stuck them in my mostly unused kitchen, declared my cockroach farm home, beat with a broom the man who tried to crawl through the window until he gave up. Then I installed metal bars. The front door was metal too. This was New York. I unlocked it for you when the man who slept in the hallway started shooting the ceiling lights. Most of that's a true story. I've been writing a series of poems about a long-running Italian telenovela. This is one of them. This is telenovela 1. They've just been given numbers. I don't spit on the plate where I eat, the son without steady work explains to his worried father in a long-running soap opera, an Italian proverb that sends me to the internet. They drink wine on their patio off the Golfo di Napoli. Yesterday, I was on another patio, a restaurant off Arthur Avenue. A woman with a Bronx accent was so loud we decided to move inside, where Andrea Bocelli was singing Cante Parturo on the mixtape. In Puglia, I heard the song during a church service, loved it so much, I emailed the priest to ask the song's name, carefully checking that my Italian was correct. He never responded. Silly American to email a priest about a pop song of loss and goodbyes. Leaving our patio seats started a movement. The tables emptied out. Everyone then enjoyed their wine in the air conditioning, listening to Andrea Bocelli, except for the loudmouth still on the patio and her friends. When Andrea Bocelli sang in front of the Duomo in Milano during the lockdown, that video with all the silent cities of the world, music for hope, made everyone cry as if soap were burning their eyes. We watched the death count going up. Watch the Italian family at the center of the telenovela who live in Posillipo overlooking Vesuvius. The purses are big and voluptuous. Everyone is serious. The only one smiling is the girlfriend of the married doctor who wants to rid himself of a stalker wife. The girlfriend likes his new apartment. Her walk is springy. She's in love. She hasn't a clue. So as Lynn said, the damage done takes place in the late 60s, early 70s, and it's set during a period of very intense COINTELPRO activity in which the government harassed people who were supporters of progressive causes, people who were members of progressive groups, including indigenous rights groups, feminist rights groups, civil rights groups, etc. And so this book focuses on a protagonist named Janie, who's dead at the beginning of the book, and through a series of flashbacks and other writing, we find out what happens to her. It's essentially a murder story, a detective story in verse. So this is Woman Recumbent in Car. A car sits in violation of parking rules, the only car on the street. In it, blonde hair peeks out from a blanket on the seat. It's early in the morning. A tow truck operator new on the job. He's back from vacation, wonders if he should have remained on the beach. The blanket reminding him of scratchy sand, pina coladas, his newly minted wife. Every day, people come back from vacation to tragedies. Picture him sitting in his truck, waiting for the police as he plays cuts from Blonde on Blonde. Every day, people listen to these songs. He's a Dylan, classic rock appassionato, wonders if the dead woman is a debutante like Edie Sedgwick in Just Like a Woman. He wonders if his new wife is full of feminine tricks. This collection has a very iconic detective, kind of a noirish figure, and here is where he's introduced. The detective can't sleep. If he smokes too much, maybe he won't think too much. So here are the Marlboros, and there are the backup Marlboros. And here are his teeth, a yellowing, broken up roadway of too many cigarettes. He's thinking about a pigeon grazing nearby, a cooing ruin, how every trash pigeon in New York City is descended from a banded homing pigeon that didn't go straight home. Nights he tosses, sweats. It's the D-ball, steroid for weightlifting. It's the rust-colored stain on his bedroom ceiling that looks like a fish with no insides, like the drawing a child makes. But his son is bored of drawing, his woman not looking at him fondly. It's the dead that keep him awake, and a crowd hovering like today at a double feature of the gorgeous grotesque, noticing something not right. Part of the history of the main character, Janie, is her marriage, and her story is told in a series of flashbacks, as I said, and this is one of them, flashback bedroom. Blame the walls and doors. They entice the husband to punch them. 5 stitches on his right wrist just last summer. Inanimate objects only. He says he is a man of peace. His familiar rage, it doesn't cease with 3 days in a row of humid heat, 90 degrees. And how come Janie wasn't in her room in Taos after the shoot? Like an asymptote, she's gotten so close to perfection, can taste how close. Like she tastes the black coffee, water, sugarless gum, all she's had for days. So tired of being shown off like an expensive watch. Her precision surgery on her food, he critiques her microscopic cutting. And how did her ass blow up overnight? The mirror is relentless. The water, she drinks too much of it, needs to do more calisthenics, the weight on the scales unchanging. The food she pretends to eat. Sometimes she has to put a small bit in her mouth, exercise the gain away or purge, but anything is better than throwing up again. The rules for when he can look at her, only when dressed or when the lights are out, darkness and cover. Her ribs, where downy pale white fur has begun to grow, though she is freezing all the time. The room of ecru walls, the color picked from over 30 variations of beige. For weeks, samples were shuffled and placed on their bed while she tried to decide. His only comment that nothing was getting laid on their bed lately except the paint swatches. Blame the husband. He likes them thin and young. And I'm going to end with a poem about Vietnam. In this part of the collection, the detective is going to visit his brother, who has been injured in Vietnam. And it's titled "A Free Fire Zone Means Anything That Moves Can Be Shot." Talking again about how green everything was, the fire and smoke, the mountains and silence, the jungle, which he never gets past when he tries to tell the story of how anything that moves is shot, and he was shocked, and here he is now in their parents' home instead of a rat's ass chronic care veterans facility. Has been like this for years, body broken, shrapnel still in his head, trying to talk to his older brother, the detective, who's wondering if the kid wants to die because someone now will have to do it for him, and all he had needed to do was stall a little bit. The war was winding down, or be some other place on some other hill, not that hill, where nothing will ever grow back, a monument to ill conception, instead of here now, crying again, some spittle on his lips. Thank you.
I think we're gonna end the program here, because it's getting late and they have to drive home in the snow. So thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you all our poets and our photographer. We all enjoyed the program.
You was coming back?